A blacksmith is arguably one of the most important trades in medieval times. Without their skill, the entire kingdom would fall apart. So imagine being paid to watch the metalwork in front of you. Sounds great, right? Well, perhaps not when you consider how long a blacksmith has to spend making those beautiful swords, axes, and horseshoes. According to historians, a blacksmith usually worked around 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and was expected to make around 3 horseshoes a day. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but when you consider that each horseshoe requires the blacksmith to nail each shoe to the horse's hoof one by one, it starts to add up. And let's not forget the other tools they have to make, such as scythes, sickles, knives, and even farming equipment. So the next time you hear the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, remember they are not just crafting weapons of war, but also essential tools that keep the kingdom running smoothly. From squaring up to their enemies on the battlefield to jousting against fellow knights, medieval warriors seem like the epitome of bravery and adventure. However, recent research suggests that these brave knights were actually more bored than brave. As a matter of fact, a study conducted by Oxford University discovered that many knights participated in tournaments not because they were excited about combat, but simply because they were bored with their everyday life. During the Middle Ages, knights had little else to do besides practice their fighting skills and hone their weaponry, which led them to become quite skilled fighters. However, this lack of other activities left them with a lot of free time, leading to boredom and a desire for entertainment. As a result, they turned to jousting and other forms of combat as a way to break the monotony of their days. Life during the Middle Ages is often romanticized, but the reality was far from glamorous. For the average peasant, their days were filled with hard work and there was little time for anything else. As soon as the sun rose, they began working the fields, a task that continued throughout the day. Meals were simple and often consisted of only bread, cheese, and vegetables. The only break from the routine was the occasional religious holiday, which provided an opportunity to attend church and socialize with other villagers. However, this respite was short-lived and the cycle of hard work and simple living continued until the peasants' dying day. The Middle Ages might seem like a time of constant warfare and famine, but for the average person, life was actually pretty dull. In fact, most people spent their days working in the fields or caring for livestock with little variation in their routine. Even the famous medieval festivals were more about hard work than merriment. While it's true that the holidays like Christmas and Easter were celebrated with feasts and games, these were typically reserved for the nobility and the upper classes. For the common folk, holidays were more of a time to rest and recharge so they could get back to work. Many historians argue that the reason why medieval people seemed so happy all the time was not because they were living in a golden age, but rather because they were too busy working to worry about anything else. While medieval royalty might seem like larger-than-life figures who lived in luxury and power, the reality was much more mundane. As the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And this is certainly true when it comes to the lives of medieval kings and queens. Despite having absolute power over their kingdoms, medieval rulers were often stuck in a rut of boring daily routines. They spent most of their days dealing with paperwork, meeting with advisors, and attending religious services. Evenings were often spent hosting lavish parties or watching theatrical performances. While this might sound glamorous to us today, it was really just another day at the office for these overworked monarchs. For centuries, medieval castles have been romanticized in literature and film as places of intrigue, adventure, and heroism. However, the reality of living in a castle was far from exciting. In fact, it was often incredibly dull. Castles were primarily built for defense, which meant that most of the time there was little to do. Residents spent their days tending to the castle's many chores, such as cooking, cleaning, and repairing the castle walls. Entertainment was scarce, and residents were expected to behave properly at all times. This strict lifestyle left little room for excitement and adventure, making castle life more of a chore than a thrilling experience. Life in the Middle Ages is often portrayed as a thrilling adventure filled with knights, dragons, and damsels in distress. However, the reality was far from exciting. In fact, most people lived and died within a 10-mile radius of where they were born. Travel was dangerous and difficult, so most people never saw much of the world. Even the biggest events of the era, such as the Black Death, rarely affected people directly. While some aspects of medieval life may seem exotic to us today, for the average person, it was just another day in the ordinary. Medieval farmers led a monotonous and challenging life. Their days began before sunrise and ended after sunset, with little time for anything else. They worked long hours planting, tending to and harvesting crops, as well as taking care of livestock. Farmers relied on the unpredictable weather to provide them with food and income, and they faced the constant threat of crop failure or animal disease. Despite the challenges, farmers found ways to make their lives more bearable, such as forming close-knit communities and finding joy in simple pleasures like music and storytelling. However, their lives were still tedious and difficult, and they were often seen as low on the social rungs. The Middle Ages is a period of history that many people find fascinating. However, one aspect of medieval life that often goes overlooked is sleep. While it's easy to imagine the struggles of living in a time without modern conveniences, it's also important to consider the challenges of sleeping in the Middle Ages. People slept in whatever clothes they happened to be wearing, and they often shared beds with other members of their family. In addition, they had to contend with noisy roommates such as servants, apprentices, and farm animals. Despite these challenges, medieval people found ways to get a good night's sleep, such as by using herbal remedies to promote relaxation. Medieval marriage was a complex institution that had both positive and negative aspects. On one hand, it provided a means of uniting families and creating alliances. It also offered women a way to secure their economic future and gain access to education and health care. However, marriage in the Middle Ages was often arranged for political or economic reasons, which meant that love was not always the driving force behind the union. Marriages could also be expensive and time-consuming, requiring lengthy courtship rituals and elaborate ceremonies. In addition, divorce was rare and difficult to obtain, which meant that unhappy marriages could last a lifetime. Despite these challenges, medieval marriage was a deeply meaningful institution that played a central role in the lives of most people. Thanks for watching. If you want to help us make more videos like this one, please subscribe and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear what you think.